Hello everyone, I'm Linda Kincaid. You're watching CNN Newsroom live from Atlanta. Tonight, the battle for the Donbass intensifies as Russian forces push forward with their assault on a key city. We'll have the latest from the ground and the US plans to send in more weapons. Then, a grieving community in Texas farewell a murdered teacher and her husband, who families say died days later of a broken heart, as more questions arrive over the police response. And later this hour, Ukraine's national football team plays their first match since Russia's invasion, and emotions are running high. Well, just before we get to our coverage of the war in Ukraine, we need to let you know that a verdict has been reached in the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial. That verdict is expected at 3 p.m. Eastern, just an hour from now. We will have more on this later in the show. Well, as Russia appears closer than ever to seizing the entire Luhansk region, the US now confirms that it will send Ukraine advanced weaponry that could help change the course of the war. The governor of Luhansk says Russia now controls 70% of Severodonetsk. That city is the main focus for now of Russia's offensive in the Donbass region. Ukraine describes the situation in Severodonetsk as very difficult, but says it hasn't given up the fight. The US is giving Ukraine a huge boost by fulfilling its request for more advanced rocket systems like the one you see here in this video. They will extend Ukraine's reach, allowing it to attack targets nearly 80 kilometers away. Russia has accused the US of adding fuel to the fire. But Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Moscow knew all along what the consequences of its actions would be.
The Ukrainians have given us assurances that they will not use these systems against targets on Russian territory. There is a strong trust bond between Ukraine and the United States, as well as with our allies and partners. President Biden was very clear with President Putin about what the United States would do if Russia proceeded with its aggression, including continuing to provide security assistance that Ukraine needs to defend itself against the Russian aggression.
Well, I want to bring in Melissa Bell in Zaporizhzhia, Ukraine, and Alex Marquardt in Washington. Good to have you both with us. Melissa, I'll start with you because Russia's invasion of Ukraine is approaching 100 days. The U.S. now preparing to send in these advanced rocket systems. What difference will they make?
Well, these are precisely the sort of weapons that Ukrainian armed forces have been pleading for several days now, because that balance of power does appear to have shifted along the line. Of course, you mentioned Severodonetsk, that town to the northeast of where I'm standing that appears to be falling fully into Russian hands. Ukrainian forces continue to fight for it, but that does appear to be the next city that is likely to fall. But it is all along that line, including here at Zaporizhzhia, that you get a sense of just how important and the difference that that weaponry is likely to make. It isn't simply a question of range, and what we've now had confirmed is that the weaponry that's going to be provided to Ukraine includes long-range rocket systems that can reach up to 49 miles. The Russian positions here I'm standing are about 30 miles away, and what we've been seeing over the course of the last couple of days are villages to the south of Zaporizhzhia being shelled. And the point about the weaponry that's now being delivered, not just the rocket systems, but also the targeted munitions, it isn't just a question of range, it's actually a question of technology. What the Ukrainians have been asking for is the kind of weaponry that will allow them to better target those artillery positions that have been used already so far to such devastating effect over the course of the invasion so far, Linda.
All right, Melissa, I'm going to come back to you in just a moment. I want to go to Alex in D.C. Alex, in an opinion piece in the New York Times, the U.S. president explained his reasons for sending in these advanced rockets and said we're going to make it clear. He said, we're not encouraging or enabling Ukraine to strike beyond its borders. Was that aimed at a Russian audience?
Well, the president was kind of cleaning up there also this notion that he had put forward a couple of months ago that that President Putin cannot stay in power, and he said that it's not up for the U.S. To decide, but he does want to make clear in giving over these rocket systems that these are meant for the Ukrainians to defend their territory. And you played that clip of Secretary of State Tony Blinken saying that they had gotten assurances from the Ukrainians that these rockets would not be used to fire into Russia. What the U.S. and the Biden administration have been repeating today as the rollout of this aid package has been announced is they believe these are precisely the rockets and the rocket systems that Ukraine needs. However, that is different than what Ukraine has been asking for. Let's just be specific about what Ukraine's getting. It's a system called a HIMARS. And we just heard from the Pentagon just a short time ago saying that Ukraine was only getting about 4 of these systems in this first tranche of aid. And with those HIMARS systems, they will be getting rockets that, as you mentioned, or as Melissa said, can go up to around 50 miles or 80 kilometers. But President Zelensky and others have said that they need ammunition that can go over 100 kilometers, around 100 to 140 kilometers, in order to take back territory, in order to open up sea routes through the Black Sea. The reason Secretary Blinken and President Biden wrote in his op-ed that they are giving these weapons is to give Ukraine the strongest possible hand at a negotiating table. That is, Linda, an acknowledgement that we are now in a grinding phase of this war, and that eventually one day this war will end through a diplomatic negotiation. Now, President Zelensky may have given the U.S. these assurances that they will not use these rockets to fire into Russia, but Russia certainly is seeing this as a provocation. We have heard that from the Kremlin, as well as from the Foreign Secretary, Sergei Lavrov, that these rockets from these advanced systems, they believe, are an escalation of the type of weaponry that the U.S. is sending into Ukraine. One more note from Secretary Blinken earlier today when asked how he saw this war unfolding. He said it was impossible to predict how long it would go, but he said we are still looking at many months of conflict. Linda.
Yeah, it certainly seems like this is going to drag out. Alex Marquardt for us in DC, thanks very much. Melissa Bell, I want to go back to you because Ukrainians are still facing a fierce battle in that Luhansk city of Severodonetsk. And of course, in that Russian-occupied city of Melitopol, we saw that car bomb exploding. Talk to us about the Ukrainian resistance.
It's a crucial factor, of course, in a war that involves, of course, the counteroffensive now that Ukrainians have launched to the south of here to try and retrieve some of the positions around the city of Kherson. But again, because of the vulnerability of so many of the cities, and I don't know if you can hear the siren that's going off here in Zaporizhzhia right now, it is also a question of the resistance that's been mounted inside. Now, you mentioned Melitopol. It is not very far to the south of here. In fact, the mayor of that city, you'll remember, had been kidnapped. We met him a couple of days ago, and he told us that that city has seen, over the course of the last few months since the start of the war, hundreds of Russians killed by partisans inside the city trying to fight back. An explosion in the southern Ukrainian city of Melitopol, blamed by Moscow on Ukrainian resistors. And on Sunday, Melitopol is Ukraine, chanted in the heart of a town that's been in Russian hands for nearly 3 months. Yellow ribbons more defiantly displayed than elsewhere in Russian-held southern Ukraine. From Crimea to Kherson, symbols of silent resistance. But Melitopol's noisily resisted from the start. After the early chants of its people were silenced, and when the town's mayor was kidnapped by Russian forces in early March, some locals turned to armed resistance.
It was a very dangerous situation.
Now in Ukrainian government-held Zaporizhzhia, Ivan Fedorov says Melitopol will never give up.
They can kidnap, they can kill, they can't make some tortures, but we can't give support because our citizens don't want to live in Russia. I know it. Melitopol will return to Ukraine.
Melitopol fell quickly, and even as Russian forces pulled back to the south and east of the country, remained on the wrong side of a line that has hardened.
Russia is using hybrid methods of occupation. That means the Russian Federation is trying to identify and destroy centers of resistance, Ukrainian partisans. Such people are often uncovered and will sometimes disappear in Russian prisons.
Idea of the yellow ribbon was
Which is why the Yellow Ribbon movement has become key, according to its spokesman in Kyiv.
передусім мета жовтої стрічки.
He tells me the ribbons allow people to pass on the message that Ukraine is present here, that there is no other south than under the Ukrainian flag. Here in Zaporizhzhia, there's also a sense that that line between Russian-controlled Ukraine and the rest of the country is hardening even as it continues to move forward. We can hear here the regular sound of outgoing artillery fire, but we can also see an emerging refugee crisis. Hundreds of families living in their cars as they try to get back to their homes, now in Russian-controlled cities. Now, Linda, we've been back in that camp today speaking to some of those Ukrainians angry that they can't get back to their cities in southern Ukraine. And what Ukrainian officials have said is that one of the problems they're facing is with that dealing with that humanitarian situation, allowing them back in is the danger to the south and the fact that communications now in the greater Zaporizhzhia region have been cut. So of the 5 districts, 3 are entirely without communications. Linda.
Wow. Our thanks to you and the team for your reporting there on the ground for us. Melissa Bell, thanks very much.